A lot of players may think that competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Either boils down to getting luckier than your opponent, or simply being the better player all the time and completely outplaying them. But if that were the case, we'd probably not be playing this game. Don't get me wrong, there are elements of both luck and skill when it comes to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! But what makes the game interesting and enjoyable to play is how each game is never decided by the same factors. There are games where it'll be neck and neck the entire way, but also games that are decided as soon as the opening hands are drawn. So why should you care? Today I'll walk you through all levels of the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG and show you how many things a competitive player at each skill level is thinking about when they play the game, so you can see how the game works at every skill level. No matter what you think your skill level is, I'll be talking about different things you can do at each level to improve. So if you're interested in becoming a better Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, then this is the video for you. Starting off at level 1, this is the player who's just starting to move from casual play into the competitive scene. At this level, players are really only thinking about what they themselves are playing. They're focused entirely on their own deck, their own combos, and their own card choices, but they don't really have any awareness of the larger metagame. A lot of players at this level are also playing pet decks. These are decks that they personally enjoy, maybe because they like the artwork or the theme, but they're often not particularly strong competitively, and sometimes these players will even refuse to play stronger decks simply because they don't like them. The problems players face at this level is once they start entering competitive events, they're suddenly facing a wide range of decks that they've never even seen before and are likely better than whatever they're playing. If they don't know what the opponent's strategy is trying to do, it becomes very hard to interact with it effectively. So as a result, players at this level often struggle at competitive tournaments, not necessarily because they're bad players, but because they're going in without the knowledge of what other decks actually do. So my tip for those at this level is to simply stay open-minded. Try to get a basic understanding of what the most popular decks in the metagame do. You don't need to master every matchup yet, but just knowing what the opponent is trying to accomplish already makes a huge difference. Alright, level 2 is where players start to become more aware of the overall metagame. These players understand what decks are good, and they're willing to play those decks. This is often where net decking comes into play, meaning they'll take a decklist that has already performed well in an event and copy it card for card. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with doing that when just starting out. After all, the list has been proven to work, and so taking it can mean you can focus more on playing the deck well rather than actually trying to build a good deck from scratch. Because they're using such strong decklists, these players will sometimes have good results at smaller tournaments like locals, but they still tend to struggle with consistent technical play. Even with a strong deck, they might miss sequence combos or make inefficient plays during games that still lead to their loss. So they'll have moments where things go well, but it's not quite consistent yet. My tip for this level would be the following. The best thing you can do here is simply play more games. The more games you play, the more you naturally start picking up on higher level concepts that our experienced players use, like solid technical play. That brings me to level 3, which is what I would consider the average competitive player. If you go to most small to medium sized tournaments, a huge proportion of the players will fall somewhere around this level. They have some competitive experience, they understand the basics of the game, and they have some interest in trying to improve. It's at this level where players start thinking more about their technical play. For example, they might begin each turn with a high-level general plan of what they want to accomplish, whether that's trying to set up as big of a board as possible if they're playing a combo deck, or establishing a strong resource loop that will give them a good grind game. They'll also understand some simple concepts like when to draw cards before searching them, or how to sequence cards more efficiently throughout their turn to get the most value. Players at this level also start trying to improve in small ways. Maybe they watch videos about gameplay tips, for example. If this sounds like you, well, I know just the right channel. Anyways, maybe these players will also do test hands for their deck to see what their endboards may look like, but a lot of them are still net decking and not really thinking about deck building yet. And this shows up in their results, since results-wise, these players will usually do pretty well at locals, and they may occasionally have some success at a regional event, but they're not consistently performing at the highest level yet. So my tip for this level is to start analyzing your games more seriously. That might mean testing specific matchups intentionally, trying to play through hand traps or common choke points during test hands, or even watching back your games as possible to try to identify any mistakes. A useful thought here is the 80-20 rule. In many cases, you can learn 80% of what the top players know without an extreme amount of extra effort, and the simplest thing you can do to start is just by studying your own games and learning from your mistakes. Before I get into level 4, I just want to quickly ask you to consider subscribing to the channel. This video took me a lot more effort to create, and if you find it interesting so far, I'd really appreciate it if you can show that by subscribing. It doesn't cost you anything, but it tells YouTube that you like the video and it helps the channel out greatly. I'm also trying to hit 15,000 subscribers by the middle of 2026 when I graduate, so every extra sub counts. Alright, now let's get back to the video. Next up is level 4, where players are starting to move above the average competitive level. Most players you see in the later rounds of tournaments, especially at the higher tables, will likely be around this skill level or higher. These players have some competitive experience and likely have a few decent results or regional top 8s to show for it. One big skill that separates them from the lower levels though is the ability to make simple reads on their opponent. Instead of just reacting to what happens, they start thinking about what possible combination of cards their opponent might realistically have, and try to play around it accordingly. This is pretty similar to the concept of ranges in poker, where the best players aren't necessarily able to know which 2 cards their opponents have exactly, but can make an educated guess about the types of hands they likely have based on how they've played the hand so far. So in terms of a Yu-Gi-Oh example, players at this level can start making simple reads about unknown cards the opponent is holding. Take the Draconaut deck for example. There are 3 possible Draconaut traps: Sting, Horn, and Flame. And if the opponent has shown you that they've set Horn and Sting there in their combo, and 1 extra unknown card face down from their hand, a player at this level should be able to recognize that the other face down is most likely a Draconaut Flame, since that's the trap card that most Draconaut players will prioritize first. Or if the Draconaut player has already set all 3 trap cards during their combo, any additional unknown card should only really be a bluff like an extra Draconaut spell card, or a piece of chainable non-engine like Forbidden Droplet if they play Board Breakers in their deck. Players at this level may also start incorporating some higher level strategies into their gameplay. So, for example, they may consider scooping early in a game to conceal information about their deck and make it harder for the opponent to properly side deck for the next game. They may also start sequencing their plays more intentionally to check for hand traps. And finally, they may also use simple bluffs to try to send false signals to their opponent. For example, checking a set card in a way that makes it look like they're thinking about using it, even if they aren't. These are small edges, but these are things that separate the average players from the above average players. So my tip for a player at this level to continue improving would be to start thinking about the game more deeply outside of the matches that you play. Talk about strategy with other players around your skill level, or ideally players that are slightly better. And most importantly, try to start identifying specific areas of your game that you want to improve, like technical play or making reads. Now level 5 is where a decent player becomes a good player. These players may have some premier event results like YCS tops or other strong finishes at big events. One difference at this level is a player's ability to deck build. Instead of just copying deck lists and net decking, these players might start experimenting with underexplored tech cards or strategies. They recognize when certain cards might perform well in a particular metagame and aren't afraid to deviate from the standard choices if it makes sense. More importantly, they also start understanding why certain cards are good or bad, and the roles they play in the deck. If you're interested in learning more about these card roles and want to master deck building, you can check out the featured video on the top right of their screen right now, where I go into these concepts in more detail. In addition to deck building skills, these players also get much better at information management, which includes both concealing information and using information. For example, suppose you have a way to set up 7,000 damage this turn at the cost of all your resources, but aren't sure if that would be enough to end the game since you forgot what the life point total is. Instead of asking the opponent how much life points they're at, they might ask what the life point total is for both players, which avoids revealing their intention of going for a game to the opponent. On the other hand, they may also use available information more effectively. For example, they may check an opponent's graveyard and be able to draw conclusions about things like what resources have already been used, what cards might still be available to the opponent, and what the opponent's possible plays are in a given turn. And that brings me to my tip for this level. In order to continue improving, try to start learning more about higher level card game theory and study the decisions of the best players by watching their replays. Which brings me to the next level, level 6. Level 6 is where we start talking about elite competitive players. These players usually have multiple premier event results, like several YCS tops or even some premier tournament wins. One major difference that sets them apart though is intentional playtesting. Instead of just playing games casually, these players are actively trying to find the best plays and analyze every decision in every single game that they play. They'll review their games carefully and constantly look for ways to improve. Players at this level also have a very strong understanding of higher level card game theory, whether they think about it consciously during a game or sometimes just knowing it intuitively. Now I won't go into depth about each of these theories in this video, but by knowing about theories like the philosophy of fire, who's the beatdown, and tempo and efficiency, these players give themselves an additional edge in game. These concepts help guide their decision making throughout a game and can actually be the difference between winning and losing a close game every so often. Okay, so my tip for this level is going to be this. At this point, any further improvements will come from a mindset of continuous learning. Even elite players are trying to constantly identify small areas where they can get better, so you should too if you're serious about improving. Finally, level 7 is where the legends of the game are. These are players who are widely known in the community for their skill, consistently perform well at large events, and have built strong reputations over time. They understand everything we've talked about so far, but there are a few additional qualities that set them apart. One of the biggest ones is that they're not afraid to fail. Sometimes they'll bring something completely unexpected to a tournament because they genuinely believe it's the right choice, even if no one else agrees. You likely won't ever hear about these times if they don't succeed, but the few times these wild ideas work, they are immortalized in Yu-Gi-Oh history. A good example of this would be Dinka Bui bringing Prank Kids to a YCS when most players wrote the deck off as unplayable. He was able to recognize that it matched up pretty well into common meta decks at the time like Thunder Dragon, and of course, combined with his strong technical play, he was able to give himself a big enough edge to win the tournament. These players also tend to have very strong testing circles. They're surrounded by other high-level players who can challenge their ideas, provide feedback, and help refine both common and unorthodox strategies that they may be preparing. Mentally, these players also have a huge advantage. They understand that luck is a part of the game. Sometimes things out of your control will happen and you're just not meant to do well in a particular tournament. And that ultimately shouldn't affect the way you play. Because of that mindset, they're able to not tilt and continue playing their best even when something doesn't go well. Another interesting trait is their ability to adapt their playstyle depending on their opponent. For example, they may recognize when an opponent is likely to fall for a bluff, or when taking a more straightforward line is better. Overall, players at this level have reached the pinnacle of competitive play. Of course, they can still make mistakes as they're not machines, but their biggest strength is their consistency and their ability to always feel like they're in contention to win the next big trophy. And so that wraps up the 7 levels of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope you found it interesting to learn about the different levels of the game, and regardless of what level you think you're at, hopefully you're able to get some useful information from it too. What level do you think you're currently at, and what level are you aspiring to get to? Let me know in the comments below. Also, before I end off the video, I just want to give a quick shout out to CardTrader. They're an online marketplace where you can buy and sell cards, and by using my affiliate link in the description below and use code tcgsam at checkout, you can get 5% off your entire order while also helping to support the channel. But with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.